Are you alright?
Hi, mate. How are you? Okay.
I'm good. I'm good. You're in Miami.
Yeah, mate. The time difference is it's caught up on me some days, so I keep getting
Uh,
mixed up what the time is.
I bet you do. I bet you do. It looks like a nice little backdrop there. Is that the hotel?
Yeah, just in the hotel, mate. Yeah, I think it'd be
Whereabouts in
too.
Miami stay?
I think we're on South Beach. I'm staying in the Edition.
Oh, right.
Um,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
but
So
it's
to be
first
honest,
time.
I've never been to Miami, but it seems I think I've heard the humidity is quite
Yeah, I think
quite heavy.
it's actually quite quiet 'cause I think it's the heat season, so it's been nice though, really nice.
Yeah, I bet it is. I bet it is. But I agree. I appreciate you coming on today. Just kind of talking a little bit about passion within football. I mean, obviously, someone like yourself, obviously, you played for quite a long time now, haven't you? And
Yeah,
grown up, grown up like your early years. Where did that kind of passion for football begin?
it's probably comes from such an unconscious mind because I just always remember being a young kid and being obsessed with football. So I feel like you are born with it in a way. I don't feel like it's something that you can't force yourself to love. Yeah, look back on all the pictures from when I can remember and when I was a baby. Say it was always football. Either a football kit on or a football in hand or just me playing football. So yeah, it's been a passion from the day I can remember up until now, and it's so it's obviously a great game. I've been able to appreciate it from playing and now the last few years watching it and sharing other people's passions and seeing how particularly the young players at Nottingham Forest. You know, I was with them a lot last year, and seeing them young boys live out their dream and trying to help them along the way has given me some fulfillment as well. So it's not just the playing side of it that football can bring.
Yeah, I feel like I mean personally, like for me, with my like obsession with football, really kind of it was kind of my dad. You know, my dad was telling me about obviously I support Liverpool, and he was obviously a big fan of Liverpool. Was there someone in your life who was kind of like that with you? Who,
No, my dad definitely loved football. I had three brothers, and my sister um, was and is married now, who to Scott Parker, who was in my life from the age of 5. And he was someone that um, at that age, even at 15, 16, he was a very good player. I think he played for Charlton's first team at 16. So I guess little things like that in my life, without really knowing at that age, would have played a massive influence in my desire to want to become a footballer. Say my dad, yeah, he was keen and loved the game. He was my biggest critic after games, even at a young age. So I was always driven, from parents and my brothers and people like that to always improve, critical on me. So yeah, I guess I was definitely pushed in the right direction for sure.
do you think that's important to have the critic, the critical element of from a parent? Because I mean, I remember seeing Thierry Henry, when he was talking to I think it was Diary the CEO on the podcast. He was talking about he scored 6 goals, and his dad said to him, yeah, but you did this wrong. You did this wrong. And I was like, where do you draw the line? What do you like with your kids? I don't know whether they're into football or is that, do you think, something that helps the kids, or do you think that?
It's difficult. I know if I'd have scored 6 goals, my dad would have been stopping off at McDonald's and we'd been having a great day. So my dad he definitely wasn't that strict on me. I think it does depend on the child. I think looking at it now, I don't have any sons. I have girls, and at the minute they're not too interested in football. So if I was to have a son, I think it really does depend on the character of the child, because I was someone that definitely responded well to criticism and wanted to be the sort of person, even going through my professional career, especially at the ages of 19, 20, 21, and probably up until you know 27, 28, where if someone said something too critical, it could piss me off because I would know myself. But I know I had a great experience with Eddie Howe as my manager, and he got my personality down to a T when it comes to knowing when to criticise and knowing not when to. So I think it does just depend on the child's personality. I feel like parents, it is something you have to be careful with, because I've been at games. I've been watching my little brother. He's older now, but when I was a bit younger and he was younger, and even keeping my eye on some of the young Nottingham Forest lads, on some games that I see when I was in on a Sunday, under 10s, 11s, and there's some information and some parents that I'm looking at thinking you're definitely not helping your kid here. Shouting from the touchlines is, for me, my dad would have never have done that. I wouldn't have appreciated that, and I think parents have to be careful. They have to make sure that ultimately they're doing it for the best of their kid and not for their own ego. And I think that line can sometimes get crossed, and that's when ultimately it's not beneficial for anyone.
Yeah, it is important, isn't it? Because I think sometimes parents can have like dreams that they may have had in the past. They wanted to be a footballer, it didn't quite happen, and they're like, "Well, my kid's got some talent, so I want to push them as much as possible." But it can be a bit too much, can't it? Sometimes.
100%, and I do keep going back to that. It definitely depends on the boy and or the girl. It's if Thierry Henry, you go back to his example, I'm sure he found. He found football at that age probably so easy. The fact that he could go and score 6 goals, it probably wasn't that difficult for him. So the example of him saying he scored 6 and his dad said, "You didn't do this right," for someone like him, it would apply, because no doubt he was probably, the scoring the 6 goals bit was the easiest bit, and the finer details is then when someone like him would have to be pushed. So, for someone like him and kids that talented, of course, it makes sense when the real finer details are picked on. For me, I was a good player. I certainly wasn't, that level of being the best player on the pitch every single week, especially when it went to academy level. It was very competitive, and I had to be at my best every single week. So I think as long as my parents see me giving it my all, that was probably the biggest and the only criticism that I ever faced as a boy was if you didn't give it your all and you didn't work your hardest.
I think that's really important, that, isn't it? Just kind of telling your kids to just do the best. And I think I remember hearing a quote, I think it was from John Barnes, that he mentioned that if your kid's going to be a footballer, they're going to be a footballer. Don't pressurize them to get in the academy at a dead young age. Let them enjoy the football, the school football. It's important, isn't it, to love the game. And on the topic of passion, I think it's that love for the game, I think, sometimes can outlast the pitfalls when you're being criticised by the media, which, as you'll know, it must be really tough having people talk about you and how they think that you could do better in certain areas. But it's about keeping that, know that you love the game and the reason you started, isn't it?
Yeah, I do feel that the first point with when it comes to making sure your kid just loves the game and playing to love it, it is a difficult balance, because if you can see your son or your daughter being able to better themselves or the environment they're in, that they're way too good for that environment, I think it's always important to push your kid to be able to come better ultimately. When I look back now, I didn't really play for my school team that much, and as much as I would have loved to have played for my school team, I would have potentially missed out training with my academy team at the time, which was Charlton, and I know that I would have learned so much more going to that training session than I would playing in a school game and scoring 5 or 6 goals. And of course, you have to have that balance of doing that and enjoying it with your friends, but the balance of pushing your child to what you think they're good enough to do is still very important. If I had a son and I recognised he was, a very good player, better than his Sunday league team and better than his school team, and he kind of just wanted the easy route of being the best player and not challenging himself, I probably wouldn't accept that, as much as he thinks that's the best thing and he's able to as I say, be the best player and get all that little glory. Ultimately, it's going to be very short lived if he does want to be a professional footballer, because he has to. I think there's obviously some success stories where someone comes into the game really late. I think they're complete one-offs. I think a child and footballers have to experience, um, real challenges, real competition from a young age, and they have to become better through that. If there's a young lad that, in my times at Charlton, I faced challenges where John Joe Shelby's great player and had a great career. He was coming. He was a few years younger than me, and he was coming up through the ranks. And when he got to 16, he leapfrogged me. So that was a challenge for me. That it was tough being a young boy and having someone younger than you. But for sure, later on in my career, it definitely helped me. I remember Bournemouth. We was in the Premier League at the time, and we signed Jack Wilshere. Instead of me, thinking, "Oh no, Jack Wilshere's coming. It's going to be really tough." My mindset, and it was probably set from a young boy. It was like, okay, well, I'm going to make sure I'm going to try and be better than him. It didn't faze me. So I do think them challenges from a young age are so important if you're going to have a top career or even a good career, average career. So yeah, as much as I get what John Barnes was saying, and I do think it depends on the level of your kid. There's no point in it's complete flip reverse. If your kid's not good enough and he's at an academy and he's really struggling, I'd recognise that, and I'll take my son away and let him go and enjoy playing for his school team and being a better player, or going to his Sunday league team and being a better player, because ultimately football isn't there just to be a professional. Football's there to love and to enjoy for all the standards, for boys, girls. So I do think as a parent, the most important thing is to be honest with yourself, because ultimately it's your child's life and their happiness that outweighs everything. So being able to, maybe I can see it through a better eyes, because I kind of know what it takes to get to the level. So I think if my son or my daughter, if I was to have a son, I really hope I do one day. I feel like I would recognise that quite quickly, and so my only job as a parent is to, one, push them to be the best they can, and alongside that, that comes their happiness. So I think it's important to recognise, get the balance, really get it right.
You mentioned balance there. That's so important, isn't it? And even your daughters as well. Like whatever they decide to pursue in life, it's all about that support, isn't it? If you going, whatever you're doing, you'll still push them, so you can take the little lessons that you've had from your early years of football, which we'll touch on in a minute, to them, to say, obviously you're going to face backlash, you're going to face people who are maybe better than you in this area, but it's about, you mentioned Jack Wilshere, it's about going, it's healthy competition, isn't it? I think it's about your mindset, how you look at it.
100%. And I feel we're in a dangerous territory at the minute in life, to be honest, where that sort of competition isn't really welcomed. I feel we're creating an environment where, I don't want to go overboard, but I just feel like we are potentially creating weaker people. I think we have to be careful in how we teach our young people. I think people have to accept life is tough. Decisions will be made, whether it's in any walk of life, not just football. And ultimately, there's going to be times where you're going to be disappointed, you're going to be upset, but that's normal. And I think we have to just face up to disappointments. We have to face up to challenges. And, I look at my children now, and of course I worry about the future, because I know for a fact my eldest is 7. At the minute, she's not had to face any disappointment. Thank God. But I know there's going to come a point, and my job as a parent at that point is to one, identify if she's been done wrong, which if she has, then it's my job to maybe explain why. But ultimately, if she fails at something, that's just a harsh reality, that she wasn't particularly good enough at whatever she was trying to do. And if she wants to carry it on, then she has to go and work harder. There's no shortcut to anything. And I just think it's so important, especially for the young people.
Mm.
to really teach them life lessons and use examples. Of course, I can use examples of me growing up and the challenges I faced, and just try and teach them that. So, yeah.
I feel like as well in like school, I remember there was never like a life class, was there? You know, where they
No,
teach you to do your taxes, they teach you all these types of things that you need and to
yeah,
face the knockback. I mean, obviously you say that's the job of the parent, but it is important, isn't it, to make sure that people know that in every situation we're in, we do have a choice on how we respond to certain things. On, you know, whether we get a knockback, we have a choice whether we sit back and go, well, oh, I'm not going to do anything now. I got beat, or to go, you know what, I'm actually going to get better and I'm going to pursue that even more because that's something I want. And it's about being sure, isn't it? And I think
yeah.
if you teach that self confidence, then kids are going to grow up in a certain way where they can face those challenges.
Definitely. And it's not even to overcome. If you fail at something to overcome, it doesn't mean that you then go and achieve what you just failed. It's learning from it. It's identifying that, maybe I wasn't good enough to do that, but I gave it my all. Of course, I look back on my last 4 years at Nottingham Forest, and there's question marks in my head now whether, did I give it my all, but is there more I could have done? And that will probably live with me for a long time because it's something that I can't now go back and change. And there's massive disappointments with that. I feel I've learned a lot from even in the last 4 years. So it's not even children and kids that, are learning. It's adults. There's so many things where you look back on and think, could I have done this better? But ultimately, the only way and the best way of accepting it is probably the hardest thing is to accept that, yeah, maybe I could have done this. And just knowing that you can't go back and changing it is the difficult bit to accept. But at least going forward, you identify that, okay, it didn't work out there. Initially, I thought it was because of this reason, which I think a lot of people do, and particularly footballers. Every footballer, when they get dropped, they blame. It's probably just your natural. It's probably to protect yourself. It's always the manager's fault, but ultimately, 9 times out of 10, it's the player's fault. It's my fault that I got dropped by Nottingham Forest. I didn't play very well at the start of the season when I joined, and that led to 3 years of a real tough time from a playing perspective. So I think it's just important to accept ultimately that when something doesn't go right, there's a high chance that it's your fault. And I think that's the hard part for people to accept. But I think once you happy and you can accept that, then I think going forward, your mind will be a lot clearer to go and do what you want to do.
Definitely, and I couldn't agree more. As I say, it is that mindset of going, yeah, but it was probably me, and that's something that you've obviously got now. But going back to your early years at Charlton, is that something that you had then? And obviously, you've got to face in the academy, you've got to face a lot of knockbacks, and you've got to constantly be on the best at the top of your game. And what were you like then that you are? So compared to the way you are now, what were you like then, and where was your mind at?
I'd say my career, I've been quite level-headed throughout my career, and I feel like my experience at Charlton probably set me up for that. So I do feel so fortunate for the experience I had at Charlton, and that was at a really young age at 17. So when I was coming through, I was for sure put on a pedestal that I felt the transition to being a professional footballer, even from 14, I thought this is going to be the easiest job in the world. I see, as I say, my brother-in-law, Scott Parker, who went on to great things into his career. And from such a young age, I see it so plain sailing for him. So when then I'm put on the pedestal at a young age, I signed my first professional contract at 14 when I was at Charlton. So I was still at school, knowing when I turned 16, I was going to be a professional footballer for 3 years. Or I think it was 2 years. No, 3 years. So in my head, from the age of 14, I'm like, this is the easiest thing in the world. I'm going to play football. Of course, there's games that I find difficult, but it was fairly. I was good enough to be seen as one of the better players. And then the transition of going full time at Charlton was easy. I was training with the first team quite a lot, and I thought, you know what, I've absolutely
Top of the
cracked
world.
it. Yeah, life is easy. So And then I faced a big injury. I ended up rupturing my Achilles, so I made my debut for Charlton at 17, um, and then I ruptured my Achilles. But there was a build up to that. I was injured for like 3 or 4 months. Then I was out in total for about 14 months with an Achilles injury, and without realizing, at that point, Charlton were a Premier League club. By the time I returned, they were bottom of the Championship and getting relegated to League One. So much had changed in that club, and so much had changed as me. People that were below me were now above me. So many players that for sure I was above ended up either playing for Charlton's first team or going on loan to other league clubs where I was completely absent. And it got to the end of my contract, and I struggled to come back for probably 6 months, 7 months. Put on a lot of weight as a young boy, and I struggled to get back into the swing of playing. So my lesson then was like, wow, it can change. With the click of fingers, I've gone from this to that to being released, and not having a club. I went on trial at AFC Wimbledon, and they was in the conference at the time. They didn't want me. I had been on a few trials at Ipswich, Gillingham, and all these clubs didn't want me. So the fall in grace was so big for me. The realization of, now I'm just a normal kid again. I've got no education really behind me. A lot of my friends went off to university, but I didn't have any sort of education to get me in university. And the harsh reality really hit me right then at 17. I was now 18. I moved back in with my mum and dad, and I ended up signing just for a local team called Woking, who were the Conference South. But that's where I feel like I definitely had something inside me that gave me a platform to go and have a career, because I've seen so many players in non-league, and it was only a year I was there, but so many good players, like honestly, so many good players. Ones I always question, like, where did you start? How did you get here? And the common theme was, it was always someone else's fault. I went to this club, manager didn't like me, fell out with this manager. And without really recognizing, I probably understood that, do you know what, this is definitely not, this is a common theme here. It's always someone else's fault. So I decided at that point, I'm either going to be good enough or I'm not going to be good enough. And I gave myself a 2-year window to play at that low level, and think, if I give it my all, if I believe that I can be a footballer. And at this point, I'll be totally honest, I was like, if I can get back into League 2 or League 1, then I'll be happy. I can try and push on from there, but it can give me a career for 10, 12 years. A lot of my friends who, as I say, were below me at Charlton were playing Championship, League 1, and I knew I personally always felt I was better than them. So I always knew I could do it.
Yeah.
So as a team, I joined Woking. They were part-time, but I went full-time there. I lived at my parents' house, went training in the day by myself, and then went and trained at Woking. And I'll be honest, I wasn't the best player every week at Woking. This was part-time football. It was very rare that it would be an easy game. It was a decent level. But towards the back end of the season, I started doing well. I scored a hat-trick in one game, and I think that kind of sparked a little bit, because I was still only 19, so it was young. And then Bournemouth come and watch me, and they took a chance on me, and I made such a conscious decision to say, this is now literally my last chance. And that's where luck for sure comes into things, because I had such a great manager in Eddie Howe. Even at that point of his career, he was incredible, like an incredible guy. He had a real passion to improve people and improve people's lives ultimately, because we were League One. Bournemouth were, a very small club at that point. The money was terrible. It was, nothing that was going to retire you, put it that way, if you stayed on it. So he identified that we had such a young squad, And I remember sitting down the first meeting I had with him, and it was genuinely like an interview. He asked me what I wanted to achieve, and
Really?
he probably looked at me as if I was a nutter, because I told him I wanted to be a Premier League player and get to that level. And of course, I was so far off that. But he was incredible, and I do feel lucky that he was my manager, because for sure, without him, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation. I don't think I would have ever got to the level that I eventually got to, because he dedicated so much time, so much effort, and it's a massive influence on my career and as a person as well. So I'm so grateful, and I feel lucky that I managed to get into that club with him at that time, for sure.
Having that mentor is so important, isn't it? Someone who, and I think when you mentioned that you wanted to be at that level and you said it to him during that like interview kind of situation, he probably saw that and thought, I want him.
Yeah.
He's definitely someone I want because of the mentality that you had. And obviously you mentioned about Charles and kind of fought during your injury, they kind of fell down the ranks. And talk to me a little bit about what that was like then, not just managing it as a player and obviously wanting your team to do well, but then also the fans of the club, then having to manage their expectations, because as fans, we can kind of go, well, he should be there, but we can't do it. So what's that process like of having to manage their expectations and their passion compared to yours?
I would say I never really experienced that until I probably signed for Fulham later on in my career, because at Charlton I was a young boy. Social media really wasn't a thing then. They didn't never see anything from fans, and never really heard anything. And because I was so young and not playing, as an individual, I never really felt the pressures. But Charlton, they sacked 2 managers at that time, so of course there was big pressure, and it wasn't a nice feeling within the football club. But from a personal point of view, I never felt that. At Bournemouth, it was such an incredible journey that it was just positivity, like genuine. That's where I feel, and I know I was lucky, because from the day I signed, we had a year or 2 in League One, and then we had a couple of years in the Championship, and then we got to the Premier League. So it was just constant success every single year. And only now that I look back on my career, I haven't retired yet, but when I look back on my career and I look at those moments, and particularly the feelings I've had probably the last 5 years of my career, and for sure the criticism that I faced more personally than anything, I realized that chunk of my career was an incredible time. And it makes me, really proud to be part of that journey, but also, very lucky that I was sheltered from what it can be like. And as I say, the last 5 years, it's been different. It has been a different experience, and ultimately one that I haven't particularly enjoyed.
Yeah, the fans we can be so when you're doing well, we're made up, but when you're doing bad, we want you out. You know what I mean? That's kind of the mentality. I think it's important to make sure that you're aware of how, especially you mentioned social media. I mean, now I look at even like Jude Bellingham. He's someone who the media they have adored him for so long, and I think now people after the Champions League final, they're making little digs and remarks about his. And you think to yourself, he's 20, and he's a fantastic player. Just let it be that, rather than having to comment all on social media. It gets a bit too much, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of social media, and I probably haven't had social media now for about 8 years. And even when I did have it, 7 years, I mean, even when I did have it, I never felt comfortable with it. And that was a point where it was very positive for me. The social media side, the Bournemouth fans, I had such a great relationship with them. Bournemouth in general, we were seen as a club that, had done incredibly well, and there was always positives that were shown to us. But even the positive sides of social media, I just never felt comfortable with interacting with anyone. I never felt comfortable reading positive stuff. So the balance for me has always been, I've not liked either of it, and I can comfortably say I've never enjoyed the good bit, and I'm for sure haven't enjoyed the bad bit. I just don't get social media in general. I feel it's um, a massive problem in the world. I honestly do. I think Instagram, and I'm not talking about football, I'm talking about general life. I feel worries me with my children growing up with Instagram and all the filters that people put on
False
certain.
expectation, isn't it, of what you should be like?
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I honestly, I don't get it. I don't know if it's an insecurity that we're facing, that the world's facing, that everyone feels a real insecurity in it. I think it's more that, because I see so much negativity, and ultimately, when someone's really negative about something, that comes from a place of unhappiness. Um, I have been unhappy in my life, of course, and I've never felt the needed to do that. But for sure, when I'm happy, there's no way I'm ever going online and typing something negative to someone I've never met before, or trolling someone, or really taking notice of anyone's life, unless that person is crying for help or needs help. I just find it, yeah, strange. There is loads of nice stuff on social media. I feel, whether there's appeals for people that need help, or some really good success stories, or yeah, some stuff that's really inspirational, for sure, that stuff is great to see. But I feel that's probably 10% good, and 90% of things that ultimately aren't good for anyone. So yeah, I'm not a keen social media fan. So
Do you think that would have affected you differently when you were in your early years? You grew up with it? Because I know a lot of lads now are in the academy, and it's kind of like they just, when they win a game, it's posted on social media, and then as they get bigger, obviously the criticism can kind of come in when they get first team type of football.
yeah, for sure, I get the big players doing posts, because ultimately they're doing it for money. They get
Yeah.
they're getting sponsorships, and they're having to promote certain brands. So no, no disrespect to the fans and people like that, but the reality is these big players are doing it because they're doing it for sponsorships, and
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
ultimately getting paid. So, and of course, players do want to interact with fans. If it was as simple as players knowing that they can interact with a fan and have a nice, genuine conversation, then every player would do it. I would have done it if I could put a tweet out there, and I know someone's going to read that tweet and it genuinely means something to them, or it brings any benefit to them. Of course, I would have done it. I just feel a lot of the messages now are very, someone has literally typed it for them. The player then copy and paste it and puts it on his Twitter, and then waits for all the comments, whether they're positive or negative. And yeah, I think the negatives do a lot more damage than
yeah.
what the positives can do for you in a positive side. So I don't see the point in them. I think, looking at it now, I had an experience at Fulham in particular where it was definitely the first time I faced any sort of criticism from fans, and it was very social media based. I felt it was quite harsh, because didn't think I'd done too bad as a player at Fulham, if I'm being honest. But
Yeah.
there was a real criticism towards me as a player. And yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy it. I think the more thing that I was worried about, and didn't like, was if my family and friends see it, because yeah, that's what I was more worried about. I don't want them feeling them upset or being disappointed. And thankfully my kids are way too young to see that. But if they would have seen stuff about their dad being written that was negative, no, I wouldn't have liked that. But I know my people in my family, would have seen it, and probably then worried about me, which, yeah, you just don't want any of that feeling ever. So Fulham was the first time where, yeah, I was like, this is strange. I
Yeah.
don't think I've been that bad. Maybe, for sure there were times I wasn't good enough, but it was a bit like, give me a chance, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
And then going forward to Nottingham Forest, it turned into a bit of a joke. Ultimately, the criticism was football based, and then ultimately it turned into something else. So, as I say, I'm someone who's quite, mentally strong. I'm not. I've never let it upset me or really affect me. But it's the first time I've seen it. I'm like, oh yeah, it's the first time I experienced that at Fulham, and it wasn't it wasn't a nice feeling for sure.
Going back to a positive outlook of the fan base and obviously yourself, where you felt happy was obviously Bournemouth, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
especially the 14-15 season, obviously in the Championship. Touch a little bit on that and how important it was, obviously, to lift that trophy at the end of the season.
Yeah, that was incredible rise for so many of us individuals as players, but also massively for the club. It was such a rise, and it was nice that every player kind of had the similar journey. A lot of players that had started off at better clubs and had to go down the leagues to come back up again, and we all shared such a similar passion, and as a group it was such a nice group to work with. We all were we all were very naive to what we were actually achieving. I look at Ipswich this season and it seemed a little bit similar to Ipswich, to be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of players that they haven't gone and bought really experienced Premier League players to get them up. They've got a really good group there. And it does mean a lot more to you as a group, I think, when you do it that way. But reversing that for the fans, for a Bournemouth fan, I think it was 6-7 years before that they were nearly finished as a club. So for everyone around that time, it was such an incredible experience, something that no one could have predicted. When I joined the club in, I think it was 2011, there was zero chance that club could have ever got to the Premier League. And of course, we had some investment in a Russian owner that we had at the time, but ultimately it was still players that were played, not big money for sure. There was no big contracts handed out. It was just a group of boys. We were all very young boys that very naive to what we could achieve, but thankfully we had a great manager behind us, and we managed to experience and achieve something that was incredible.
Do when we build stuff up, like when you've got like an ambition that you kind of want to achieve, and you build it up in your head, and you're like, God, when I get there, I'll be so happy. And then obviously you take the steps each day to get there, and then when you finally get there, sometimes it doesn't feel as sweet because you've done it. It's reality. What was that like for you? Did you feel that was there a sense of dopamine that was released that you felt really jubilant when it happened, or?
Strange. Yeah, it's a good question actually, because I think at me from a personal point of view, as a club, I would say that feeling definitely for the fans it would have felt like that for a long time. Even going later parts of that season, they still would have had that feeling. I think individually, not really, because as soon as we got promoted, we obviously had our parties. We went, I think, to Las Vegas and had a great time together. And then and a lot of the lads had international duty. So I went away with Ireland. I actually made my debut for Ireland that summer. And then I picked up a really bad injury. So straight away I went from feeling so high and so happy to feeling incredibly low, because no one knew what my injury was. I ended up being out from August to around, I don't think I returned until October. So I missed the first 3 or 4 months of that season. So that feeling didn't last very long. For me. I was then itching to get back in. The team we'd started, if I can remember, okay. We ended up falling into the bottom 3 around September, October time. So then it was just a challenge. Then it was like, lads, we need to stay up. So that feeling of, of course, the jubilant and happy period for me personally didn't last that long, and I'm sure for the players it was similar. It was a different feel for the fans. Every game felt like a party sort of atmosphere, and it was a really good atmosphere to go and play in. But individually, no, it didn't last as long as I'd hoped it would, put it that way.
Well, yeah, because it's like you look at the likes of, City obviously now, and Liverpool in the last couple of years, we've won a lot of trophies, and probably even Real Madrid now. I know they've just signed Mbappe, but they'll be looking at like, right, what's next? They won't have time to celebrate. You're like, right, have a couple of weeks off, but we've got another season. We've got to be at the top of the game, and that's what it takes, doesn't it, to even like stay in the Premier League? I think teams don't realise, do they? We look at Luton. Luton did fantastic to get to the Premier League, but sometimes that step is a massive jump. Same thing with Burnley. So
Yeah.
it can be sad, can't it, sometimes when you achieve something that you really want to achieve, but you're like, well, right, I've got it now. You know,
Yeah.
it's over.
Yeah, I would say as a group, we never felt like that. And I may be wrong in saying this, but I'm not sure. We the lads were definitely driven by wanting to stay in the Premier League, but also finances, because as a group, after we got promoted, we were still, by far the lowest payers in the football club. But Bournemouth were a club that, recognised and rewarded players doing well and rewarded loyalty. So we had a lot of players from the Championship promotion from 2014 all the way up until the year that Bournemouth got relegated, which I think was 2020. So along the way, Bournemouth, for sure upped the finances for everyone individually. So that carrot for the players was, lads, you stay in the Premier League, there's a massive reward for you at the end of the season. And that happened for 5-6 years. So we, for sure, we recognised that. And that was a massive drive for us, because the difference in finances once you go up or go down, is a completely different league. So yeah, it sounds like it's a bit money orientated, but it's not. But
I mean, but most people, it's a drive, isn't it? It is that.
Yeah, we had
Actually,
that drive, and Eddie Howe was very open about that. He was like, lads, I remember at the start of every season, he would tell us to write down our goals and write down what's going to drive us. And money wasn't the first thing on the list, but it was on a list where it's like, this, lads, if you get relegated, that part of the list is definitely gone. And of course, then you have other drives, like, you want to do your family proud. You want to be able to look back, and now I can look back on my career and have this sort of chat where it's like, I'm talking about achieving that rather than the disappointment of it happening. So, so many different goals and drives once we got there to then try and stay in the league with her.
Looking at Eddie Howe now, obviously he's at Newcastle, and they obviously kind of, I feel, overachieved. I know they've had new owners and that type of thing, but they've done it in I think, a gradual way where they're starting to just increase the club and make it a better organisation in general. But as a person, how imperative do you think it is to have? I think obviously there's different types of managers and different types of styles, and you have tacticians, and then you've got more man managers like Eddie Howe, who I think his passion for the game is something that'll rub off on his players. Is that something obviously you've mentioned before that you experienced?
Yeah, like he for me, he hasn't changed from the day I met him to the person he is now. And of course, he's improved when it comes to the tactical side of stuff and general experience of competing at a much higher level. He's improved, but his core principle from the day I met him to who he is now is self-improvement for players, wanting to better players, and the buy-in that he gets from his players. So there'd be days, and this hasn't happened at any other club. And it may be because we lived in Bournemouth and the town is really small, so getting to the training ground takes 10 minutes. But he would be in every day on his day off, and the door and the pitch would be open for players to come in. And if they want, he would come out of them and improve and do extras. Now, I've never seen that at any other football club. And it's not, I've not just seen it, it's the players at Bournemouth, everyone wanted to do it. At other clubs, it like, what are you thinking? Of course you're not going to come in on your day off. It's like, stop being a busy little what. So he was able to create a mentality, and I have seen that at Newcastle. There's a group, they're together, and there's a real togetherness in that group. And that comes from him, and it comes from his genuine honesty, and he's wanting to help and improve people as and it doesn't matter if it's the best player in the team or someone who's struggling to get into the team. He doesn't single out who he wants to help. It's everyone. So he's a great guy, and I think Newcastle are lucky to have him, because I look at I look at the season they've had this season and the amount of injuries they've had. They've had to rely on a group of players who will run through a brick wall for their manager, because I've looked at the amount of games they've had to play and the amount of players that they've had missing. Physically, they relied on a group that were going to give their all for their manager, and ultimately they done that because it was Eddie.
That's remarkable the way you say that. I mean, coming in on his day off to that's setting an example, isn't it? It's almost
Yeah,
like he's subliminally not saying like you have to come in, but it's open and I'm
yeah,
in. So it's like people will take advantage of that and come in. But that's a lovely. I think, as you say, it's not something that you see in barely any managers. I've never heard of anyone doing something like that. So it's remarkable the fact that he did do that, and I think that gets the best out the players, doesn't it?
yeah. It does. And then so like when if you're going to be dropped or you're not going to play, there's almost like it's coming from a place of this is best for the team. It's not.
Mm.
This is not a personal thing. Like it never felt personal. And I'll be honest, there was a time where we did fall out, where I have to take responsibility for that. But it never ever felt personal with him. And looking back now, of course he has got a very harsh side to him that people probably don't see. But ultimately, his job and all he cares about come Saturday kickoff is winning that game. And he will pick and he will decide what the best team is for that game, and that will be based on the training week, obviously the week before, and everything is deemed, in my opinion, looking at it now, everything is based on, if you're dropped, it's ultimately your fault.
Exactly. Well, going back to the passion side of things, how far do you think passion can take you? Because we've mentioned before, there's certain other things that will drive you, and that sometimes when passion flies out the window, it's like motivation, isn't it? Sometimes motivation flies out the window. Often it does, and it's the discipline aspect of like, right, I've got to get up and I've got to do this certain thing. But how far do you think that not only maybe personally took you, but would take other players?
It is difficult. It is difficult because I personally think you need a mixture of everything. If you haven't got passion, you're not going to be a footballer. Fact. Doesn't matter how good you are, you'll fall down eventually on the discipline side, the actually wanting to go and improve. But passion isn't going to make you a footballer, because sometimes people are just physically and technically, for whatever reason, not good enough. That's just a fact. Players are better than other players. I look at my career and I think if I didn't have such a strong passion, I probably may have had a career at Conference, League One, League Two level, but I certainly wouldn't have got to the Premier League. I feel there's players in League One and League Two that probably a similar standard to what I was as a younger player. And I do put it down to passion and luck for sure. You have to have luck along the way. So passion is at the forefront, but it's not going to be. You've got a kid and you're looking at him now and he's not wanting to sleep, and all he's going to want to do is go and play football. As much as you want him to be a footballer, that isn't going to make it alone. So it is important, and you have to have it. There's still loads of other factors to blend in with it.
Having that balance, isn't it, of multiple
Yeah.
facets of you as a person. But when you see players nowadays, whether that be in the Premier League or in any other league, do you see a difference between a player who plays with the passion side and that freedom of that they just love what they're doing, compared to a player who's necessarily not playing for those reasons and just kind of likes the fact that he's a footballer type thing?
It is more difficult now to notice passion because I feel football is so tactical. I feel like it is so tactical now, where, of course, passion, like, it's not like your old school passion where you've got John Terry, Rio Ferdinand, Tony Adams. I look back at them old school sort of defenders, and that was so passion. You could feel their passion every game. Now a defender's more judged on how he can receive the ball from the keeper, how he can pass it, and that needs just pure composure. So passion and composure kind of are the opposite in a weird way. So it's hard to see that passion come through in a player. But of course, I look at all the Man City players, their desperation to win. Arsenal were the same this year, their desperation to win. Even though everything's so calmly done and so technically well done, their desire to win has to come from their passion. So I think you have to judge passion now on a completely different way that we did back in, even going back 10 years. Instead of someone going to smash someone, everyone would have went, look how passionate it is. It's not, you can't judge it by that now. So for sure, the passion's still there, because you see the celebrations and you see the pain when a team loses a game, and that's all led by the feeling and the passion of wanting to succeed.
Definitely. Well, Harry, listen, it's been fantastic talking to you again. Obviously, you're in Miami, so go and enjoy the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll speak soon anyway, but thanks very much.